This is every reason why the gaming industry just keeps getting worse, and what's really behind it. Everyone loves Unreal Engine 5. Developers love it because it's easier to learn than their own studio engines. Publishers love it because it helps them market their games and allows them to outsource development. Everyone loves Unreal Engine, except for us. Although it can make things faster, easier, and in some ways more photorealistic, we, the consumers, have to make a lot of compromises. And the question is, are they worth it? Shouldn't we care what kind of engine a game is based on if it is often unplayable or requires powerful hardware that costs so much money that so long ago you could buy cooler things for that type of money? And the main question is whether this obsession of Unreal Engine 5 developers is destroying the gaming industry. Given that there are few competitors on the market that can deliver this level of graphical detail and technical capabilities while remaining very affordable, it's clear to see why Unreal Engine is so popular. Recently, we've seen several major studios announce that they are switching to Unreal Engine 5 for their upcoming games. For the future The Witcher 4, CD Projekt Red decided to abandon its own Red engine in favor of Unreal. For me personally, this is a rather strange decision, as the Red engine is visually superior to the Unreal Engine in some places, as we could see in Cyberpunk. Even the developers of the new Mafia have abandoned the company's internal engine and are creating the fourth installment on Unreal Engine. Ditto Microsoft, who rebranded 343 industries as Halo Studios, which will now use UE5 for future Halo games, while the studio abandons its own engine that they have been creating for years specifically for Halo Infinite. At the same time, BioWare is switching from Frostbite to Unreal, which is probably the best as Frostbite is not very suitable for third-person role-playing games. But BioWare has much more serious problems in game development. Who knows if they will even make it to the release of Mass Effect 5. Crystal Dynamics has abandoned its own engine, and the next Tomb Raider game will also be developed on Unreal. GSC Game World also abandoned their own engine to switch to UE5 for Stalker 2, and as we could see, it was definitely a rather controversial decision. This is exactly the case when Unreal Engine really messed up the game and brought quite significant problems to Ukrainian developers during the release of a long-awaited game. And although poor optimization and bugs are, let's just say, an ingrained part of the Stalker series, Unreal is simply not suitable for this game. After all, their artificial intelligence and NPCs use the specific technology of their personal engine, which allowed them to create unique behavior patterns that were the hallmark of the series. That's why the well-known revolutionary A-Life simulation technology worked so well in the first part and so poorly in the second. In general, many studios are now developing games on the Unreal Engine. This trend is not a bad thing in itself, but there are some serious problems that worry me and this dog. First, Epic Games has effectively monopolized the game engine market. Monopolized? Yeah, I said that right. Every studio that switches to Unreal brings Epic a percentage of their game sales, and Epic gets control over what games can be developed on their engine. The new standards for the Unreal Engine advise developers to avoid offensive words. Now, the code should not contain words like blacklist, whitelist, slave, and master, because, you see, it can upset someone, but that's not all. Gendered words are also taboo. Hey guys, and poor man's ex are banned. Even poor people, I can't fucking do it. Even poor people can't exist anymore. Epic officially recommends addressing everyone as they. Besides, nowadays, artificial intelligence in your games should be as inclusive as possible. Don't get me wrong, nobody is against correct language. But when a company that receives a percentage of the sales of each Unreal Engine game starts dictating how you write code, it looks like total control. Imagine a situation where you and your team have been developing a game on Unreal Engine for several years, and one of you writes a word in the code, well, for example, slave, and your game is closed. And no one knows how far Epic is willing to go with this censorship policy. If developers do something that doesn't comply with the rules, Epic can simply take away their engine license. But this is only the first big problem. The second is the unification of game development. What the fuck is that? Unreal Engine allows you to create a wide range of games with completely different styles. For example, Sea of Thieves, which has a very cartoonish style, but looks incredibly beautiful. But then there are games like Atomic Heart or Immortals of Avium that look like banal builds from ready-made assemblies and try to be photorealistic, which they don't really succeed at. I don't think I'm the only one that noticed that many Unreal Engine games have a typical Unreal Engine look, if you know what I mean. Games that look like demos, that use the same visual style, They try to achieve photorealism in the laziest way possible because Unreal Engine gives a good picture by default, and developers often do make an effort to add something unique to their game. They don't try to create some kind of compositional style or just make their game stand out from hundreds of other similar games. They just want to make everything look as realistic as possible, spending too much time on polygons instead of working on the visual style. And here we face some paradoxes, because the fact that almost all the new games on this engine look the same is the fault of the developers themselves, not the limitations of the engine. Unreal Engine does not impose restrictions on artistic expression. There are many unique games with unique styles created on this engine. As I mentioned, this is Sea of Thieves, but there are also Octopath Traveler, Borderlands, Little Nightmares, and Yoshi's Crafted World. So what's the problem then? Well, it's just my opinion, but I think that many developers just don't have the motivation or passion to create something unique. They just take the standard Unreal Engine tools and work on the visual style minimally. Besides, if you work in a big studio, your part of the work is quite limited. You are responsible for creating the vegetation in the game, and you, for example, wanted to make this vegetation not photorealistic, but somehow in your own way. Maybe some kind of painted, but some other guy in charge of character design didn't want to bother with it like you did and just made the NPCs photorealistic. Altogether, it will look very strange. Therefore, studios, in order to avoid such diversity in game design, simply make everything ready-made and photorealistic. Because of this obsession with graphics and realism, we only get a superficial visual style. Most AAA developers just throw in a bunch of shaders, lighting technologies, or post-processing, even though they don't even know how it all works. They don't know how to optimize these elements, which leads to the fact that most Unreal Engine games look great in trailers or screenshots to sell you on it, but then these games perform terribly after release. That's why I'm convinced that for most studios, switching to Unreal Engine won't solve anything. The engine itself does not make a game good. It still requires a huge effort from talented people who know how to create an attractive art style, unique animations, and work on optimization and the overall design of the game. I am concerned that both publishers and developers believe that Unreal Engine will solve everything. No guys, it won't. We're just ordinary people working hard at our shitty jobs to afford good hardware and your games at inflated prices. So please, try a little harder. I'm not against studios switching to Unreal, but I want to make it a real difference. It can be a great advantage if developers really put in the effort to create something special and not just use the superficial features of the engine. No doubt, the Unreal Engine makes it easier to onboard new developers, outsource, and use thousands of assemblies from the store to speed up development. And there's nothing wrong with that, as long as studios don't completely depend on these factors. But something tells me that the transition to Unreal is happening precisely because studios want to put less effort into development. Now, let's get back to the topic of graphics. Honestly, I can't think of a single thing in video games that I don't care about as much as photorealism. Of course, there are exceptions, when photorealistic graphics were not just an extra nice bonus to an already good game, but also had a leading role in the gaming experience. For example, Battlefield 1 greatly benefited from photorealistic visuals, as it enhanced the immersion of the game. Anyone who has played Battlefield 1 knows how realistic the battles in this game feel. Photorealistic graphics were essential for this game to convey the dramatic vision and the desperation of the First World War through the eyes of a soldier. The developers from DICE themselves said that their goal was to make the most realistic and exciting version of an alternative World War I. And the Frostbite engine has coped with this task perfectly. And in general, Frostbite, in my memory, is one of the best engines aimed at realistic visuals. Although such a powerful engine with bad developers can also turn a project into some kind of crap. Long ago, DICE proved that when graphics are backed by a creative vision, photorealism can enhance the gaming experience. But the question is, do all games need to chase ultra realism? Some of the most immersive games I've ever played use cartoon or some other stylized graphics. Just think of The Legend of Zelda or the recent Sifu. Yes, of course, there are a lot of cool photorealistic games, but if all games start looking photorealistic, won't they become too similar to each other, losing their uniqueness? Many older games stand out because of their unique visual styles and sense of propulsion. For example, From Software games. They have an extremely clear and unique combat system that benefits greatly from an engine that emphasizes artistic style over graphical detail. No Souls-style game on Unreal Engine feels even half as good as the From Software's combat system. And I think a big part of the problem is that there's some kind of innate clunkiness in the Unreal Engine code itself that prevents games like this from feeling smooth. If you've played a recent Stalker game, you'll know what I mean. Yes, the game looks great, and you can even turn a blind eye to the poor optimization, But even if you buy the best hardware and play with a good and stable FPS, the game still feels somehow jittery at the gameplay level. And it's not just a problem with Stalker. Let's take the recent Delta Force, Remnant 2, or RoboCop. Yes, these games are not bad. RoboCop was a pleasant surprise for me, as it captured the vibe of old school movies quite accurately. But all of these games have in common what almost every game on the Unreal Engine has in common. For some reason, the gameplay on this engine doesn't feel smooth. It's just kind of clunky. I don't know. Clumsy and slow, although the FPS can be quite good. Perhaps that's why From Software fans often can't play other Souls titles. None of them feel as smooth and thoughtful. I'm not a developer, but I think that many people would agree with me that most Unreal Engine games have this clunky feel to them. FPS games on Unreal often, though not always, have the same feeling. Think of the original Call of Duty Modern Warfare. Even after 17 years, this shooter still feels smoother than most modern shooters made on Unreal. To compensate for the lack of enjoyable gameplay, or new innovative mechanics, or even just an interesting visual style, developers simply use the technical progress of this engine to make cool graphics. But I want to ask you a question. Have graphics really improved that much in the past 10 years? If you look at games released 10 years ago, you'll notice that many of them can be easily confused with modern releases. There are many examples of this. Like, I can't even read a fucking easy sentence. You seen this shit? Holy shit. Oh no. I'm so sorry. My camera decided to fucking die on me. As I was saying, there are many examples of this. And the average consumer has a logical question. Is it worth spending additional years of development to increase the number of polygons in each texture by 10 times if the games already looked good 10 years ago? And then another year to optimize these many polygons, when often it's not even possible to optimize them at all. Who is this really for? Right now, we are witnessing how the Unreal Engine was supposed to become the standard of the future. But in fact, unbeknownst to everyone, it is creating a diversity crisis in the gaming industry and is literally killing games. Do you remember when everyone was waiting for Red Dead Redemption 2? Or when everyone canceled Battlefield 5 because EA decided to mock history and their best franchise? Or maybe you remember that epic God of War relaunch, which was so breakthrough in terms of graphics that not a single PC at the time could actually run it. Well, that was 7 years ago. Good morning. There were a lot of projects released in 2018. It felt as if the end of the world had been announced beforehand. And in order to raise cash for the last time, developers decided to release absolutely everything they had, no matter what condition it was in. And yes, there were some bad releases this year as well. We got the shitty Assassin's Creed and Call of Duty, but still, in 2018 alone, so many great projects came out that it seems like some sort of madness now. Moreover, most of these projects were so good and had such good graphics for its time that they look better than the games that are coming out right now. And today, I would like to recall the main release of the busiest year of the gaming industry, which I think was the peak in terms of graphics and the overall quality of games. And maybe we will be able to understand why after 2018, everything only got worse. One of the first releases of that year was Far Cry 5. To be honest, I wonder how nobody cared about this game back then. Although, it would seem Far Cry has always evoked pleasant feelings among players. Ubisoft was still somehow holding on. Not like now. Most people had mixed impressions about the game. The world in the game is beautiful, as per the classics, and this is one of the things Ubisoft really knows how to do. In general, it was a normal game that did not cause a wow effect, had good graphics at the time, although far from great. And in general, Far Cry 5 can be called the last good game in this series. Someone's fucking dog is barking. But it was just the beginning of the year, and very soon we were going to see some really revolutionary projects. Let's remember A Way Out. It was an amazing game to play with a friend, or partner, where you had to work together to get out of a prison. At the time, it was the best project to play with a friend. And one of the few problems with the game was just finding a friend. The game had pretty cool cinematic graphics as far as it goes, considering that it was a split-screen game, and you know, although this game finally laid out the foundation for the release of Joseph Fares' story-driven co-op projects that became the game of the year, such as It Takes Two, it's still a way out that looks much better to me than what they're doing now. After you and your friend escaped from prison, God of War was waiting for you, and it was this game that gave rise to one of the first waves of gamer bullying. Unlike now, back then, console exclusives were really exclusives. Major releases remained on consoles for a long period of time. The return of Kratos was unforgettable, as was the reaction of players to the first showing. When I played through God of War, it was one of my first games on the PlayStation 4 Slim, and I have memories of playing it when it was snowing outside and God of War was on the TV, which I'm stupid, sorry. And I still have memories playing through when it was still snowing outside and God of War was on the TV with its incredible production, brutal battles, breakthrough graphics, and beautiful 30 FPS. And this is despite the fact that I've never been a fan of this kind of setting, but God of War is not just a game. It's a deep story of a father-son relationship that hadn't completely sickened everyone at the time. This relationship made the brutal Kratos more human, and it's definitely interesting to watch. It was a truly legendary release. And when it comes to graphics, man, they squeezed every last drop out of that poor PS4. Looking at the way the game looks now, which is more than 7 years old, you realize that back then, the developers were really professional who learned how to develop games. And now let's move on to one of the most breakthrough graphics in games: Detroit Become Human. When this game was first released, it definitely had the most realistic and best graphics, as RDR2 was released only at the end of that year. Some people at the release of Detroit laughed at the plot, saying, "What kind of nonsense is this? How can some androids replace humans and start pumping out rights?" Well, are you laughing now? Anyway, this is a cool adventure that I'm still not afraid to call one of the best representatives of the interactive movie genre. The game offers an incredible number of different twists and turns, endings, and you can play through it more than once or twice. It's a pity that the only positive news from Quantic Dream in the near future is that they haven't closed yet and are still making their game, announced in the faraway 2021. Yes, it is far away. It was 4 years ago. Wake up. Also, that year, Insomniac's Spider-Man was released. Again, it was the time when PlayStation made their games really beautiful and squeezed everything out of their consoles. Despite the incredible graphics, which still look better than in modern superhero games, this adventure was remarkable because it does not tell the story of Peter Parker's formation for the 100th time. Here, he is already experienced. And one of the main conflicts of this game is the balance between ordinary life and Spider-Man's duties. The combat system in the game is incredible, and even after tens of hours, you don't get bored of fighting bandits because the battles have a frantic dynamic and many combinations. Among the disadvantages, I can personally name a small city that you fly around quickly, but what a pleasant flight. It seems to me that most players entered the game just to fly over the well-drawn New York City to the music, and I don't blame them. Insomniac's Spider-Man has become one of the most successful superhero games for a reason. For some, the first part is still a favorite, despite the release of Miles Morales and the second part. And how can we forget the release of Kingdom Come Deliverance? This game was literally fundraised from all over the world, and for a game that received a rather limited budget from Kickstarter, it looked simply incredible and on par with big AAA releases. Although, to be fair, this game was technically really unsuccessful, which is why people remembered it in a bad light in 2018. This is exactly the kind of game that was ideologically perfect, but technically poor, which is why players treated it with contempt. Only recently has the game become a classic, and for good reason. It's impossible to think of a game that developers would love so much as Kingdom Come. Due to the fact that Daniel Vavra is an old schooler gamer, his game feels like something from another world. It has its own unique approach and solutions that are not similar to other projects. Each quest can be completed in 5 different ways, and 99% of the mechanics are not just something to check off, but make sense. The unique world is smoothly combined with non-standard mechanics. Although at first glance during the prologue, the game may seem as boring as RDR2, after a few hours it opens its wings and shows that it is one of the best games ever released in the history of the gaming industry. This game also helped cement 2018 as one of the most successful years in the gaming industry. I personally advise every single one of you to play it, especially if you like the recent second part. So, let's dig into the scrap a bit, shall we? The new Assassin's Creed continued its travels through different eras, and Odyssey took us to ancient Greece. As usual, the game has been criticized for its historical inaccuracy, but for Ubisoft, this is obviously part of their brand strategy. On the positive side, all that can be said about the game is that the scenery was really amazing. No one could criticize the developers for the visuals and detailed elaboration of the huge open world. Thoughtful landscapes, the architecture of ancient Greek cities, majestic temples, and the picturesque coastline created exactly the atmosphere that the developers wanted to convey. Fuck! Everything else, well, of course, it is better to keep silent about the plot. In this game, Ubisoft also began to actively insert donations literally everywhere. In short, it was a good game, but nothing more. And of course, Red Dead Redemption 2. Imagine that even after 7 years since its release, this game is still called the most beautiful in the industry and is compared to all new releases. RDR2 has gone through many porting and received a variety of ratings and reviews after its release. Some people called it the best game humanity has ever seen, while others called it the most overrated, not understanding why it was so praised. And while some of them can't be understood, because it is unlikely that anyone will be indifferent to the scale, elaborate plot, or perfectly conveyed atmosphere of those times, others who did not like it can also be understood. If you've played any Call of Duty before, then RDR2 will seem slow and maybe even boring. This main complaint about the game was that it was too immersive and realistic. Yes, this was indeed one of the complaints from some players. I can partially agree with this, because some chapters were indeed a little bit too slow. But that doesn't mean that they are bad. As strange as it may sound, you need to feel RDR2 to get into it. If you can't do that, just leave the game for a while and come back to it later. That's exactly what I did. Nevertheless, everyone will definitely agree that the graphics of this game were the peak for the industry, and most likely a new peak will be reached when Rockstar finally releases their next game. This is what the graphics looked like in 2018. And this is what it looks like now. Yes, there are games that can look quite realistic now, but at the same time, these games are becoming more and more difficult to launch. And at what price? In the good old days, with each new generation of consoles, the leap in graphics was very significant. But with the release of the PS5 and Xbox series, most games looked almost exactly the same as the previous generation. We have already passed the peak of technological progress. Now we live in an era of its decline. Even if sometimes the models become better and newer lighting and rendering methods are used, a new question arises. How the hell am I going to run this? We've reached a point where developers are using technological progress as an excuse to optimize the game less or to meet deadlines. And as a result, we have new games that look almost the same as the old ones, but with 10 times worse FPS. The peak of the gaming industry has already passed. We definitely used all of the potential in terms of graphics a few years ago, but the question arises, will the industry be able to make a leap again? If you are my enemy, I would advise that you buy a new Nvidia graphics card. For some reason, the current generation of hardware in the gaming industry is not capable of running new games. However, remember the previous generations? This is what AAA games used to look like, and these were its system requirements. You needed just 1 damn gigabyte of video memory to actually look at these incredible graphics. And to play Red Dead Redemption 2 on maximum settings, you only needed 4 gigabytes. Now, the same graphics card that pulled off RDR2's ultra graphics is the minimum you need to just run Marvel Rivals. Are you serious? But what happened? Why is it that with each generation of hardware we don't get the promised performance jump, but rather lose frames, stability, and picture quality? The answer is simple and yet sad at the same time. Planned obsolescence. Ever since the days of the 1000th series, Nvidia has made its conclusions. Affordable and powerful graphic cards are not their business. So, now every new GPU series becomes garbage literally on the day of its release. Except, of course, the flagship model. In other words, Nvidia deliberately releases cards that only look better on paper than the previous generation, but in practice, these improvements are either imperceptible or ridiculous. This is done on purpose so that customers are forced to upgrade the more and more expensive models every single year, because cheap solutions are no longer able to cope with even the basic tasks of modern games. Take a look at the RTX 5070 Ti, a card that is supposed to be the golden mean for gamers who don't want to spend extra money but want to play games comfortably. Its price is about $750, although 2 generations ago, the same model cost a couple $100 less. And what do you get for this extra money? The gap from the previous 4070 Ti is a miserable 10 to 15%. And in most new games, even less. Moreover, the older flagship RTX 4090, although expensive, literally wipes out the 5070 Ti with a 40% difference. And this really looks like a deliberate limitation by Nvidia. In addition, hope for previous generations is also disappearing. You can no longer buy a 4070 Ti or even a 3070 for normal money because they are simply not on the market. Nvidia is not interested in selling old models that can compete with new and expensive ones. As I said, today this green company, like the Grinch who wants to steal your money, deliberately limits the possibilities of the middle segment, forcing customers to upgrade regularly or pay a lot of money for flagship models. But it does it in a very cunning way. Let's take the 8GB RTX 5060 Ti for example. Recently, a guy from Hardware Unboxed channel tested this video card and showed how useless it is. Without an upgrade, even games that were released a couple of years ago don't deliver stable 60 FPS. And some even 30. And a logical question arises to why Nvidia is releasing a video card with only 8GB of video memory in 2025, if this is definitely not enough for modern developers to optimize their games in any way. And I think there are 3 specific reasons why they released the 8GB version. First, non-technical buyers might buy it by mistake. Secondly, the existence of an 8GB video card will make the 16GB version seem much better than it actually is. And thirdly, customers who can buy the 8GB version will eventually be forced to upgrade in just a couple of years to buy the 10GB version of the RTX 7060 Ti, which will also be too small. Nvidia proves once again that it is the king of anti-consumer strategies. And unfortunately, they managed to realize their greedy and disgusting plan. Their plan was to completely destroy the mid-range segment of video cards. Given that, they destroyed the budget segment a long time ago. Nvidia, just like other hardware manufacturers, is now forbidden to be poor. And the best illustration of this is the 8GB in 2025. Are you fucking serious? No, I'm not saying it's not enough. Once upon a time, it would have been enough to run Witcher 3 in 4K on 2 monitors at once. But we know how modern developers optimize their games, and we see that 8GB of video memory is no longer enough for them. In tests without an upgrade, this card can't even run old games at 60 FPS. In Cyberpunk 2077, the average settings are only 43 FPS. And now we can't say that the game has terrible optimization, as CDPR has long since fixed everything here. In addition, in the recent port of The Last of Us 2 on PC, this new generation video card also gives us constant drops of up to 30 FPS. And in Remnant 2, the game runs steadily below 50 FPS until you turn on DLSS in performance mode. And so it is with almost all games. These are not isolated cases. Nvidia knew perfectly well that 8GB of memory in 2025 is absolutely ridiculous. And that's why they released a 16GB version to create a false impression of progress. Like, this one is the real one, and the smaller one is for state employees. But the state employees were simply abandoned because there are no games with 8GB of storage left in 2025. At first, you are lured by the price of $399 for the 5060 Ti 8GB. You are happy to upgrade, and a year later, new games do not run without an update. Shadows flicker, and the picture adjusts every time you switch from the cutscene to the gameplay. And this game works perfectly, because each new release is not a breakthrough, but a thoughtful wear and tear of the market, where instead of durability, you are sold repeated disappointment. In this case, you might think, okay, the 5060 Ti is a failure, but I'm not an idiot. I'll get something more powerful. For example, RTX 5080. It's expensive, but at least it's stable. But the problem is that even this is a trap. The RTX 5080 costs $1,100 officially, but you won't find it cheaper than $1,700 to $1,900 on the market, and almost $2,000 from resellers. And you know what you get for this type of money? A 15 to 20% increase over RTX 4080 at its best. In Cyberpunk 2077, it's a 17% increase. In Remnant 2, plus 14%. Alan Wake 2 has even less. And in Monster Hunter Wilds, this video card can't even deliver stable 60 FPS. How can this game run so terribly if the action takes place in the damn desert? And then you're like, okay, well then I'll buy an RTX 4080. It's the previous generation. It should be cheaper, but it wasn't to be. The RTX 4080 is only $100 to $150 cheaper now because it was simply removed from the shelves, supplies were limited, and production stopped. Nvidia is not just moving forward, it is burning bridges so that you cannot turn back. They have realized that with each generation, their hardware is becoming more and more unprofitable for ordinary people. So they simply do everything to make the previous one impossible to buy. Just remove all of the alternatives and leave you with only the new and completely disproportionate price to performance ratio. Nvidia doesn't want you to buy a card that will last for 4 years. They want you to buy the same thing every 18 months, but at a higher price. Fuck my dick. Previously, the middle class was somehow catching up to the flagships, and now the 4090 simply destroys the 5070 Ti. And even according to their own figures, the increase is 35% maximum. And this is with multi-frame generation. Without it, it's even less. Today, there is no middle segment, and you have to pay $1,800 for 12% plus FPS, because you are simply not left with any more options. Right now, every gamer who has bought a new generation of graphics cards is looking at their new RTX 50 series and laggy gameplay on medium settings and asking themselves a logical question. Maybe it's not the hardware. Maybe it's just the games that stopped working properly. In 2025, we are faced with a strange paradox. Video cards are becoming more powerful with 8 to 10 times more memory than 10 years ago. But performance is not only not growing, but actually degrading. And the reason is clearly not just hardware. Although it is unreasonably expensive, it is still quite powerful. The real reason is a change in the philosophy of gaming software development. First, the industry has finally lost the emphasis on individual optimization. In the 2000s, games were created for very limited resources, 1 or 2 gigabytes of VRAM, a weak processor, a narrow memory channel. Every shader, every polygon, every megabyte was critical. Optimization was an integral part of development. Today, projects are created on engines like Unreal Engine 5, which are powerful but resource intensive. Their global lighting, content streaming, and virtual geometry systems are designed for flagship hardware. As a result, what looks good on a top-of-the-line configuration simply doesn't work stably on the average level, which is the majority of today's hardware. The second problem is the shift in the business model. Studios used to spend years optimizing for release. Now, the main thing is to get it out on time for a quarterly report or a big presentation. The third factor is the inefficient use of video memory. Even with 16 to 24 gigabytes of VRAM, many games are unable to use it adequately. The reasons for this are poor texture caching, aggressive streaming, and improper resource pipeline construction. And if this sounds fucking complicated, then, in short, developers are just lazy. Or not. I don't know. In other words, a large amount of memory ceases to be an advantage if the game is not able to use it correctly. Upscaling is another problem. DLSS, FSR, XESS, LGBTQ. But today, they have become a replacement for native performance. From the very beginning, the game is designed in such a way that it works properly only with active upscaling. At native resolution, it freezes because it is no longer a priority. And finally, cross-platform compatibility. Most studios focus on a single target platform, a console with a fixed hardware configuration. The PC version receives only a basic adaptation. At best, it has advanced settings. At worst, a bad port. The idea of making a game that works stably on a wide range of hardware simply does not fit into modern budgets and deadlines. But even on consoles, things are not so good now. For the last few years, I've been a little confused. It seems like we have incredible hardware at our fingertips. Xbox Series X, PlayStation 5 Pro, all this powerful hardware. And yet, it seems that performance in modern console games has become noticeably worse. It turns out that the new games are running at a blurrier resolution than even the final generation PS4 and PS4 Pro, which was much weaker than the PS5. Yes, we got some nice things, like faster loading and finally getting rid of loading screens. Well, almost. But overall, it seems like we've really slipped in terms of performance. Over the last decade, we seem to have made a big leap in technology from 1280p to 4K. But at the same time, we have hardware that deliver resolutions that would have been unacceptable back in 2013. I think there are several problems here. First, neural networks and other AI algorithms for upscaling, like PSSR on PS5 or USSR on Xbox. These could be cool things, but they just make the picture worse. Many studios decided, we can't pull 4K consistently, but we can make a game in 1080p and just pull it all up to 4K with the help of AI. And now it has become a common practice to render a game at a low resolution. We are already in the 5th year of this generation. Most of it has already passed, and the performance is such that it would have been unacceptable 10 years ago. I wouldn't be surprised if the original version of a game that was released on PlayStation 4 had a better resolution than its remake today. We just find ourselves in a time where hardware is growing faster than people know how to work with it. Optimization has disappeared because it has been replaced by upscaling. And on top of that, Nvidia is deliberately limiting the mid-range segment, setting crazy prices and creating the appearance of progress. And you know what? The worst part isn't even that they charge you more. It's the more you pay, the less you actually get. Do you also feel that at some point, the gaming industry has somehow moved away from serious, gloomy, harsh, and in a sense brutal games to softer and more cheerful ones? But why? Why did almost all studios decide to radically change the tone and style of their games and popular franchises? And why, despite the fact that most of the audience does not want to see this squeaky clean and feel good vibes crap, developers continue to create and promote it? In fact, this didn't happen by chance. And it's not because of the huge success of certain games like Fortnite. Games began to look so Disney-field not due to the desires of gamers, but because of the whims of specific individuals. That's where we start. Let's take a look back at the past. At a time when life was carefree, girls were girls, and games were better. At the beginning of the second millennium and right up until the tripping point when everything changed, countless great games were released. Many of them became cult classics and launched very popular franchises that are still around today. We got Call of Duty, Max Payne, Medal of Honor, Fallout 3, BioShock, Stalker, and many other remarkable titles that we were passionate about at the time. But beyond the fact that these projects were great and iconic, they had something else in common. At the time, almost all of these games were gloomy, serious, and harsh. Developers weren't afraid to raise serious topics in their games, and yes, some of them were quite violent. One of the reasons why games looked like this back then was because it was visually more logical. Dark and muted colors, night scenes, and other color correction filters used by developers made it easy to hide graphic flaws. And there was nothing wrong with that. Okay. First of all, games back then really did look quite realistic, and even now many of them don't feel backward. And secondly, old games looked like that not only for this reason. The whole culture looked like that back then. Movies, music, no one was afraid to be too serious or to offend someone.
I'd look her right in that fat ugly face of hers.
Because the audience accepted it quite well. Seriousness, brutality, harshness, and tough guys were in vogue then. Also in fashion was cruelty. Oh yes, games became really violent back then. After the 90s, when people mostly played colorful Mario and Sonic, we suddenly got meaty shooters where you had to kill Nazis, or the GTA series, where you would wreak havoc all over the city, and other games that were clearly not for children. It was then that society first started to look at video games as a potential threat.
It is some of the most horrific, senselessly violent stuff you've ever seen.
In the early 2000s, the gaming industry and developers faced a wave of criticism and bans due to extreme gore and brutality in video games.
On video games, leading to aggressive behavior in kids.
Politicians, parental organizations, and the media saw video games as a threat to young people and accused them of inciting violence. But just like now, players and developers didn't give a shit. In 2001, in the United States, a lawyer named Jack Thompson, who was just bored or just wanted fame, launched a big aggressive campaign to ban GTA 3. He pissed everyone off so much that even the Florida Supreme Court sanctioned him and banned him from filing cases. A documentary starring Daniel Radcliffe was even made about his fight with Rockstar. Of course, neither Thompson nor any politician or media outlet was able to achieve censorship of video games. The gaming industry continued to provide the audience with serious, gloomy, and violent projects, and it wasn't going to stop. Manhunt is just worth mentioning. That's when Rockstar made perhaps its most brutal game yet, in which you had to play as a guy forced to do really horrible things. Manhunt was banned from sale in several countries.
Manhunt 2 is so violent, it's been banned in Britain. In fact, You may not want your kids to see.
And in the UK, the media massively accused Rockstar Games of inspiring a real-life killer, although the police later found out that the accused did not even own the game. There was a lot of pressure on the gaming industry, but as I said, most developers and publishers just didn't care. Rockstar Games, Activision, and even more cautious companies like Ubisoft not only kept releasing brutal games but also used scandals to attract attention. You all remember Modern Warfare 2 in 2009 with the No Russian mission, which was heavily criticized and the game was about to be banned.
Which is basically you have to go in and participate in a massacre of civilians in an airport, and it's an integral...
Despite this, Activision left the mission in the game, simply offering players the option to skip it. And of course, none of you skipped it, right? Therefore, the developers continued to release serious and gloomy games, and the audience continued to play them. But everything changed in the 2010s. The Call of Duty series, although it departed from the usual World War II setting, was still far from colorful skins and collaborations with rappers and OnlyFans models. The game remained harsh and brutal, mostly in colorless and gloomy tones. Over the years, several good and truly adult games have been released, but not all of them have received the attention they deserve. We got serious plots that were not afraid to show real cruelty, thirst for revenge, and raised adult and ambiguous topics. We got Dark Souls, which in my opinion remains one of the most difficult games I've ever played. It seems like this game just hated me. But let's remember Spec Ops: The Line. Maybe some of you have played it. I can't even say that this game was visually dark because the events in it took place in bright and sunny Dubai, where, by the way, this game is banned. However, the narrative and plot of this game was definitely dark. The plot of Spec Ops is probably the best I've ever seen in a shooter. It was a brutal anti-war scenario that contained a lot of quite controversial topics. Although critics praised the game quite well for its boldness and narrative, Spec Ops: The Line was not released to the general public and turned out to be a failure. Major publishers have noticed that audiences are losing interest in games that feel weighty and deep after completion. Players no longer prefer realistic military and post-apocalyptic settings, which until recently were the most popular in culture. In addition, one of the landmark moments was the emergence of Minecraft and the rapid growth and popularity of the Wii platform, which focused on family gaming. The younger audience, which quickly became the majority in the industry, no longer wanted anything violent, brutal, or masculine. Games where we have to play as a cool white dude who destroys everything around us have become a relic of the past, and with it, the same gloomy and dark tones of art design. After all, it would be very strange if a family game from Nintendo, Mario Kart, had a depressing color correction and a visual style from the Max Payne series.
I had a dream of my wife.
Big gaming companies still didn't know what to do. On the one hand, the new game from Naughty Dog, the dark and violent The Last of Us, had good sales and won the Game of the Year nomination. And on the other hand, softer toned games began to appear on the market, which were a huge success with the audience. Lego games, bright and positive platformers, as well as mobile games were very popular. And with the advent of sufficiently powerful smartphones, they showed that minimalistic light gameplay, bright colors, and cute characters can bring in billions of dollars a year. But the industry still lacked something that could unite almost the entire audience, something that could become so popular that it would not only destroy all competitors, but also change the gaming industry for decades to come. And in 2017, this appeared. You can feel differently about Fortnite, but the impact that this game has had on the future of gaming has never been done by any game. Not even Tetris, the first 3D games, or the first FPS shooters, or any other project did anything like what Fortnite did. It literally destroyed the old era of video gaming that millions of fans loved and built a new one that brought the popularity of the gaming industry to a whole new level. But this great popularity was accompanied by a significant negative perception of what modern games look like from the audience. And this video, like hundreds of others, is a testament to that. But you probably don't fully realize what Fortnite has brought to the industry. Popularization of the battle royale genre, microtransactions and skins, seasonal updates and battle pass, cross-platform multiplayer, integration with pulp culture, live services, support for inclusivity and less privileged groups, and of course, a very big impact on game design. Big studios started creating dozens of projects that were bright, cartoonish, colorful, and with simple mechanics to be similar to Fortnite because the audience loved it, millions of people played it, and they continue to play it. And although objectively this game can be called good, I sincerely hate it because it has turned an entire industry into a colorful parade that tries to be tolerant of everyone, but which has no meaning or depth. No matter how you feel about Fortnite with all its Disney vibe, you can't exclude the fact that this game has made it so that now we only have a few good and serious projects a year, which are usually developed in the Asian or Eastern European market. And we can't blame the developers or Epic Games for creating this rainbow monster that consumes and destroys everything good in the gaming industry. I think even the developers didn't expect such a giant boom for their game. No one could have known that the majority of the multi-million audiences of the gaming industry was tired of gloomy and serious games with a complex plot and instead only wanted to buy skins and run around a cartoon map. So, very soon, games became bright, colorful, polished, and focused on making a lot of money from monetization. The target audience of gaming began to turn into millions of people with no taste, and the elite, who had not yet lost their sense of beauty, like you and me, had to get by it with just a few good games. The legendary franchises changed their traditional models and began to add everything that worked for Fortnite: skins, monetization, and bright colors to their new games. But it wasn't over yet. The gaming industry may have turned into something like Disney Plus, but the main problem was still ahead of us. Something that will change games not only visually, but also what's inside them: their soul. For me personally, 2018 was the last good year in the gaming industry, excluding 2025 and 2026, which we will talk about later. This year, Red Dead Redemption 2 was released, with a good, serious story and a well-written male white protagonist. It sounds strange now, but it really used to be like that. The Max Payne series, The Witcher, Uncharted, and the first The Last of Us are just a small part of a bunch of good and successful games that featured male protagonists and promoted themes like duty, brotherhood, sacrifice, and honor. But where did it all go? Well, in fact, it hasn't completely disappeared. Yes, we can see a trend in recent years where male protagonists and everything related to traditional values have faded into the background. But even those studios that are now creating diversity-filled games realize that this will not last forever. After a long period of dominance by the Fortnite era and similar games, the gaming industry seems ready to put an end to this overly simplistic and childish trend. Perhaps they are sick of it themselves, or perhaps they feel that it will soon be unnecessary, but either way, the big studios have decided to end it. Many of you probably have heard this conspiracy theory that the Chinese giant Tencent, which owns part of Ubisoft, deliberately pushed an agenda in their games so that the audience would stop playing their crap. Due to the high unprofitability of recent projects, when Ubisoft's shares fall, Tencent could buy out these developers completely at a very low price. This theory may sound crazy, but I think most of the big publishers are using the same tactic. Giants like Activision, EA, PlayStation, and Xbox, who own franchises that generate consistent and large revenues, and who also cram excessive and unnecessary diversity into their games, cannot simply shut down the servers of those games. They can't just abruptly stop making games that are aimed at woke propaganda, and they can't fire their employees who were hired under the DEI program. This would provoke a massive backlash from the left-wing audience, increase the risk of a significant drop in their stock, and of course, they could lose hundreds of millions of dollars that they spend on developing their new projects. But at the same time, they realize that the mainstream audience doesn't like it, and over time, Chinese or Eastern European developers can easily squeeze them out of the market, because they don't worry about gays and other such stuff in their games. That's why these big companies, whose games we play because we have no choice, artificially instill in us hatred or minorities so that the audience gets tired of it. Have you ever wondered why the ratio of less protected groups in recent games is so unfair? In the new Call of Duty, half of the operatives are women, transgender, or gay, although in real life, it is mostly men who take part in military operations. Why is it that in the new live services, most of the characters are of a non-traditional orientation or some kind of freaks, although in real life the ratio is exactly the opposite? In addition, all these characters, which seem to be intended to reflect that minorities are as normal as most people, are depicted in such a caricatured and rejecting way. Why do most game journalists who promote woke culture in games and swear on the internet when some new game lacks diversity and inclusivity look so freakish and act so cringe? It's very simple. Big companies want us to start hating it naturally, but why? Wasn't their goal, on the contrary, to promote everything gay and inclusive to the masses as something normal? Actually, no. and now you'll understand what I mean. If they wanted the woke culture to start appealing to us ordinary players like you and me, who are the target audience of the gaming industry, they wouldn't make such bad games and portray these characters in such a way that hundreds of YouTube videos later say how bad it looks. A good example is The Last of Us 2. You can throw shit at me, but this is probably the only game in which the narrative of gayness and strong woman doesn't look like cringe. The main character's relationship with a girl is properly integrated into the main story, and we empathize with her. Another strong woman is portrayed who can easily handle dozens of men. She looks natural and not rejecting. She has her own motives for acting like a man, because this is the only way she can survive in this new cruel world. Moreover, this game proves that woke propaganda can be presented not in these shitty bright colors and with LGBT flags, but in a serious and brutal style as games looked like long ago in the golden era. Naughty Dog went against the system and proved that people of different orientations can look non-cringeworthy and non-rejecting, but still straight men have been and remain the main audience for video games. And of course, this audience needs games in which they want to see what they will like, the main characters they can project themselves onto, and the narratives that they support. Of course, companies understand this, so in order to quietly remove all inclusivity from their games, large publishers have started creating DEI programs and hiring various consulting companies and people who identify as anything but their birth certificates. This less protected group of developers openly hates gamers, and of course, if you hate your audience, you can't make a good game for them. The sly game companies have simply shifted the responsibility for fucked up games to the gay community, and to be honest, it's genius. And maybe you're thinking that all this just sounds like a fucking conspiracy or just post-irony, but I'm sure you're about to change your mind. Remember, a few minutes ago I said for me personally, 2018 was the last good year in the gaming industry, excluding 2025 and 2026. I really believe that in the next few years, we will finally get the projects that will bring the gaming industry back to its former glory. Just as serious and brutal games once died, and all kinds of Fortnite and its festive followers took the pedestal, right now, you and I can witness the end of the era of this Disney-like crap. Finally, the audience's negative reactions to the modern gaming industry has reached its peak. Game studios are ready to return to adult projects that will not be afraid to offend certain groups of people. And these are not just my words. Right now I'm going to show you just a few of the many trailers for games that will be released this year. There are quite a few shooters in the classic World War II setting waiting for us. Man, I feel like I'm back in 2005 again. All the projects look so realistic, brutal, and gloomy as if they were made 15 years ago, and only now they decided to release them. And even though now you see games that you hear about for the first time. However, big studios are also planning releases that will appeal to a real male audience. Next year, we are looking forward to Doom, The Dark Ages, a gloomy medieval setting, cruelty, and testosterone. Classic ID Software is back with one of the most anticipated games of 2025. Also, Kingdom Come, Deliverance 2 will be released next month, and this is the game that I have been waiting for a very long time, and in which I am completely confident Daniel Vavra, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, is a real giant of the gaming industry. The first part of Kingdom Come was the subject of a significant wave of criticism from game journalists. The Czech developers were accused of lacking inclusivity and ethnic diversity among the party, to which Daniel replied that his game was created with historical accuracy, taking into account the context of medieval Eastern Europe. He openly criticized journalists for trying to impose modern social standards on historical games, which is why we get a black samurai in medieval Japan. In addition, Daniel criticized AAA studios for creating games that no one wants to play. That's why I'm calm about Kingdom Come 2, because this game confirms that the gaming industry has started to change, and normal developers who understand their audience still exist. But this is not all. Even a new game from Marvel, who have become a symbol of childish and clumsy content in recent years. Even they thought of moving the events of their new game to an interesting setting of occupied France in 1943. Moreover, the trailer did not feature kinky spandex on superheroes or any LGBT flag with a swastika on the Eiffel Tower. The game looks quite dark, gloomy, and serious as it should be. And now you will be really shocked. This year, there will be a bunch of AAA projects where we will play as a straight white man. A remake of the classic Metal Gear Solid Delta, a new James Bond game, even the Crisis series is coming back with a new fourth part. And of course, how could I not mention Gears of War E-Day? Finally, the series is returning to its roots, after the failed past feminist installments that no one wanted to play. We will see cool, brutal guys with ideas of brotherhood, self-sacrifice, and courage again. That's what should be in this franchise. Oh man, something tells me that in the next couple years, the asses of woke audiences and leftist journalists are just gonna be on fire. Well, It's time for us to change places.